Look at the people who have definitively won the game of money. The ones who have accumulated more capital than they could reasonably spend in 10 lifetimes. You might expect to see peace in their eyes, but watch them closely and you will often see a terror that remains entirely invisible to the rest of us. There is a basic comforting arithmetic we all tend to trust about money. We assume that financial anxiety is caused by a lack of funds, and therefore, an abundance of funds must be the absolute cure. It makes intuitive sense. If you are cold, you build a fire. If you are hungry, you seek out food. If you are afraid of going broke, you get rich. But the human mind does not always respect arithmetic. Sometimes, the numbers on a ledger grow to astronomical heights, while the internal architecture of the person holding them remains frozen in a state of absolute famine. The wealth arrives, but the relief never does. The survival instincts never power down. The question is, why a man who has conquered the material world, who has built a fortress of absolute financial security, can still be entirely paralyzed by the fear of losing it? In the late 1950s, J. Paul Getty purchased Sutton Place. It was a sprawling, historic Tudor manor in Surrey, England, sitting on hundreds of acres of manicured grounds. At the time, Getty was widely recognized as the richest private citizen on the planet. He was a billionaire in an era when that word still sounded like science fiction. His vast oil empire generated rivers of cash every hour of every day. He possessed more liquid wealth than many sovereign nations, and yet, shortly after moving into his new English estate, Getty noticed something that disturbed him deeply. People were visiting the property. Contractors working on renovations, household staff, casual guests, visiting businessmen, and they were using his telephones. They were picking up the receivers and making long-distance calls. They were running up the monthly bill. For a man of Getty's unimaginable wealth, the cost of these phone calls was statistically zero. It was the equivalent of a fraction of a penny to an average worker. It did not affect his bottom line, but it agitated him to his core. So, the richest man in the world took action. He ordered that locks be placed on all the regular telephones in the mansion, and then in the hallway of his grand historic estate, he brought in technicians to install a standard coin-operated payphone. Diplomats, dinner guests, and business partners who found themselves needing to make a call from Sutton Place were expected to dig into their pockets, find the correct change, and drop the coins into the slot. He had built an impenetrable fortress of wealth, and inside it, he was obsessively counting loose change. It is very easy to laugh at the payphone. It is easy to write it off as the eccentric behavior of an old, wealthy miser, but eccentric is a polite word we often use to avoid looking directly at the pain underneath a behavior. In his autobiography, As I See It, Getty tried to explain himself. He wrote at length about the immense, suffocating burden of wealth. He described how people constantly looked at him not as a human being, but as a bank or a mark. He felt perpetually besieged by requests, by opportunists, by the sheer gravity of his own fortune. The payphone wasn't truly about the phone bill. It was a physical manifestation of a psychological wall. It was a way to assert control in a world he felt was constantly trying to extract pieces of him. Behavioral economists Mullainathan and Shafir spent years studying this specific cognitive trap, which they called the scarcity mindset. Through their research, they found that scarcity is not just a physical condition of not having enough. It is a fundamental alteration of the brain. When you lack something essential, time, food, money, that lack captures your mind entirely. It tunnels your vision. It severely reduces your mental bandwidth, forcing you to fixate on the missing resource to the exclusion of all else. The counterintuitive tragedy of J. Paul Getty is that a person can have $1 billion and still be trapped in a scarcity mindset, because scarcity for Getty had mutated. He was no longer afraid of starvation or eviction. He was afraid of exploitation. But the tunnel vision remained exactly the same. His mental bandwidth was entirely consumed by the defense of his pile. He was the wealthiest man on earth. Yet he operated with the panicked psychology of a man who believes he is being robbed blind. The money didn't free him from the fear of scarcity. It just raised the stakes of his paranoia. The payphone at Sutton Place was merely a minor symptom of a much deeper, more isolating disease. 14 years later, in the summer of 1973, Getty's 16-year-old grandson, John Paul Getty III, was kidnapped in Rome. The kidnappers demanded a ransom of $17 million. For the patriarch of the Getty family, $17 million was a rounding error. It was a fraction of his daily oil revenue. But Getty refused to pay. He argued rationally that if he paid a ransom for one grandchild, he would place a target on the backs of his other 13 grandchildren. He framed his refusal as a principled stand against terrorism, a necessary boundary to protect his wider family. The months dragged on. The kidnappers grew impatient with the silence. Eventually they cut off the teenage boy's right ear and mailed it to a daily newspaper in Naples, along with a lock of his hair and a threat of further mutilation. Only then, looking at the physical evidence of his grandson's torture, did the richest man in the world agree to negotiate. But even in the face of this horror, the scarcity mindset held him entirely in its grip. Getty ultimately agreed to pay no more than $2.2 million. Why that specific, uneven number? Because his accountants informed him that $2.2 million was the maximum amount he could claim as a tax deduction. He then loaned the remaining money needed for the reduced ransom to his son, the boy's father, at an interest rate of 4%. Mullainathan and Shafir noted in their framework that the scarcity mindset forces a person to constantly make brutal trade-offs. If you only have $10, buying lunch means you cannot buy a bus ticket. Every decision becomes a zero-sum game of survival. Getty was playing a zero-sum game with his own blood. He had built an empire so massive that it alienated him from the basic human experiences of trust, unconditional love, and grace. He looked at a ransom demand for his mutilated grandson and saw a tax deduction. He looked at his own son and saw a debtor who needed to be held to commercial terms. This is the hidden trauma of unexamined wealth. It is a slow, silent calcification of the soul. The wealth becomes the only lens through which the world can be viewed. Every interaction becomes a transaction. Every guest is a potential thief. Every family member is a liability. Look at the broader history of extreme wealth, and you see this pattern repeat. Men who build impenetrable walls, who hire armies of lawyers and layers of security, not just to keep the public out, but to manage their own paranoia. When you have more than anyone else, the fundamental architecture of human connection begins to rot. You can never truly know if someone loves you for who you are or for the proximity to what you hold. He was protected from absolutely everything on the outside, and yet he was entirely unprotected from the poverty of his own mind. The extreme examples of history are useful only if we use them as mirrors. It is very easy to judge an old oil tycoon for charging his dinner guests to use the telephone or for coldly bargaining over his grandson's life. It is much harder to observe the subtle ways that exact same machinery operates quietly in our own lives. Most of us are not billionaires, but most of us have a deeply tangled, often painful relationship with the idea of enough. Notice how often you tie your internal sense of peace to an external financial metric, a specific salary target, a savings threshold, the paying off of a particular debt. We tell ourselves a very compelling story. When I hit that number, I will finally exhale. When the mortgage is gone, I will relax. When the retirement account reaches this milestone, the background anxiety will finally stop humming. But there may come a moment in your own life when you hit the target. The promotion clears. The debt is paid. The bank account shows the exact number you promised yourself would bring peace. And then, notice what happens in the quiet days that follow. The relief is often shockingly brief. The goalpost quietly moves. The anxiety reattaches itself to a new target, a new metric, a new fear of losing what you just gained. This is the danger of believing that money can solve a problem that money did not create. If your financial anxiety is rooted in a fundamental distrust of the world, a quiet belief that you are always one mistake away from ruin, or that people are inherently out to exploit you, no amount of capital will fix that. You cannot buy a feeling in a marketplace. The scarcity mindset does not check your account balance before it floods your nervous system. It simply looks for evidence to confirm its own fears. Watch the way you handle small losses, a minor overcharge, an unexpected bill, a bad investment. Do you process it as the normal friction of life, or does it trigger a disproportionate sense of panic? Does it feel like a personal attack from a hostile world? If you do not learn to manage the fear of scarcity when you have very little, that same fear will follow you as you accumulate more. It will just wear more expensive clothes. It will disguise itself as prudence or wealth preservation. J. Paul Getty died in 1976. At the time of his passing, his net worth was estimated to be in the billions. He left behind a legacy of immense corporate power, a legendary art collection, and a family deeply fractured by tragedy, addiction, and suspicion. And he left behind the stories, the locks on the telephones, the payphone in the hallway. There is a deep, quiet relief in recognizing that the richest man of his era lived in a psychological prison that you have the power to walk out of today. Wealth is an excellent tool. It can build a house, buy the groceries, and keep the rain off your shoulders. But it makes for a terrible religion. The wealthiest person you will ever meet may not own much of anything. He may just be the man who knows how to leave his front door unlocked, who can pay for a friend's dinner without keeping a mental ledger, who can sit quietly in an empty room without feeling like he's being robbed of his time. He is the man who has learned the hardest lesson of all, not how to accumulate everything, but how to simply be full.